Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Every now and then I like to look at a strange tale from Britain's past, the hairy hands of Dartmoor, the Sandown Clown, the Lantern Man. Today's tale is somewhat unique in that it didn't happen on some windswept moor or remote marshland, but in the grounds of a stately hall in the city of Nottingham. Wollaton Hall is a giant Elizabethan mansion house completed in 1588 for Sir Francis Willoughby, the 6th Baron of Middleton. Thank you, Wikipedia. You might have seen it before in the movie The Dark Knight Rises, where it was used for exterior shots of Wayne Manor. And it's not actually the mansion house itself we're concerned with, but the grounds surrounding it, a 500-acre gardens and deer park. The event in question happened late one evening on the 23rd of September 1979. A group of 6 schoolchildren had entered Wollaton Park looking for mischief and adventure. Although most of the park is open to the public, there are certain areas that are fenced off for conservation reasons. One of these areas the children referred to as the swamps, a boggy wild patch covered in thick bushes and trees. According to the children, as they were passing the swamps, they spotted behind the fence a number of little men hiding in the bushes. These men were described as being very short, about as tall as the children's waists. They had long beards, brightly coloured clothes, and the classic gnome-like noddy hats. One of these little men came out of a hole in the fence and made an odd jiggling gesture towards the children before disappearing back into the bushes. The children then saw more of these little men up in the trees, looking down and laughing at them. Intrigued by the appearance of these strange men, the children climbed over the fence and entered the swamps. As they got closer, the little men retreated from view, disappearing into the foliage. Then a whole host of strange vehicles came out of the bushes. They were described by the children as looking like tiny bubble cars with strange triangular lights and some kind of handle for turning. In each car was 2 of these little men. These cars chased the children through the swamps, laughing the whole time as if it was a game. One of the children, Andrew, fell into the swamp head first and got covered with mud. The children ran out of the swamp area, but the gnome cars kept chasing them until they reached the park entrance. The children found that the gate was locked, so you can imagine their panic as they tried to climb over the fence. Then one of the children managed to get the gate open, so they quickly ran out onto the street. The gnomes stayed inside the park. They seemed unable or unwilling to go out beneath the streetlights outside the gate. After their unnerving experience, the children spent about an hour or so walking the streets. They talked a bit about what they'd just seen before returning to their homes. Some of these children told their parents, who of course dismissed the story as nonsense. The next day at school though, their story fell on more receptive ears, and quickly the tale of their encounter spread among the other school children, creating quite the buzz of excitement. The school's headmaster caught wind of the story and decided to question the 3 children himself. Here's the strange thing. The headmaster of a primary school would probably be used to hearing wild stories from over-imaginative children, but he came away with the impression that the children were telling the truth. Now obviously he didn't believe that they'd actually seen gnomes in the park, but he was certain that they'd seen something out there and they weren't lying about it. He got the children to draw what they'd seen, and he taped his interviews with them. As far as I can tell, these recordings don't seem to be available online, but there are transcripts and they make for intriguing reading. I'll put a link to the interviews in the description if you want to read through them yourself. They give some interesting details. The children had apparently seen these gnomes before, but only briefly during the summer holidays. They said that the gnomes had very wrinkly skin and they appeared joyful and friendly, even though the children were scared of them. And they said that the little bubble cars made no sound as they moved, and they seemed to be able to jump over fallen trees and logs. I've got to say though, after reading through the transcripts a few times, I do have some questions. For a start, there are inconsistencies in their story. Now, you would expect some inconsistency. Memory is a malleable thing, and these are testimonies from 10-year-old children, so they're not the most consistent of witnesses to begin with. Plus, this encounter happened at around 8:30 PM in September in an unlit area of the park, so it would have been pretty dark in there. But even then, some of the differences in their testimonies are difficult to justify. 2 of the children described the gnomes as having white beards with red at the tip, whilst the 3rd child describes them as all having long black beards. This seems an odd detail to get wrong. You could say that this 3rd witness simply didn't get as good a look at the gnomes as the other children did, but that same witness also described details that the other children didn't. For example, he said that their trousers were ripped and they had yellow patches on some of them, so he must have got a pretty good look at these gnomes. Perhaps in their panic they just missed certain details, and in their attempt to remember the events they filled the holes in their memory with whatever they imagined they'd seen. It could also be that if these really were some sort of otherworldly entity, that each child actually did see them slightly differently. As I've said in previous videos on these subjects, it could well be that there's some as yet unexplained phenomena that when we encounter it, our brains can't quite get a grasp of, and we sort of slot in whatever cultural reference we think might match it closely enough. This might explain why multiple witnesses seeing the same phenomena might see them slightly differently. It could also, of course, simply be that the children were lying. There are a lot of details between the interviews that match up, some of them perhaps a little bit too well. All 3 of the children interviewed said that there were around 30 cars, each carrying 2 gnomes. It seems an oddly specific number for all 3 of them to arrive at independently. Now, imagine you were being chased in the dark by a gang of gnomes in tiny cars. Would you have time to count them? Were there 20, 30, 50? I would expect to hear 3 different numbers unless the witnesses colluded before being interviewed. This doesn't necessarily mean that they invented the story. It could be after their experience they talked among themselves and came to the conclusion that there must have been about 30 cars in total and they all agreed on this number. It would be good to be able to listen to the recordings and hear the kids' tone of voice as they're answering some of the questions. I think some of the nuance is lost when you're just reading text on a screen, but for the time being it seems that we only have the transcripts to go on. Rumours about the Wollaton Park gnome encounter spread quickly, and pretty soon newspapers were sending journalists to interview the kids. The Daily Mail article gives me another reason to be slightly suspicious of the story. Andrew, the child that fell into the swamp, when interviewed by the Mail said, "I felt something drop on me out of the trees. I think it was one of the men and I fell into the swamp." It seems odd that he didn't mention this at all when questioned by the headmaster. It's a pretty big detail to leave out. After this initial excitement and the media frenzy, there doesn't seem to be much more information about the event. There are some modern day researchers who have done good work piecing together the details about the Wollaton Park gnome encounter. Most notably Simon Young, who's published this excellent book, The Wollaton Gnomes, a Nottingham Fairy Mystery. I really enjoyed reading this. The children who saw the gnomes would be in their 50s now, and there have been efforts to track them down, but so far nobody seems to have come forward. Some people have taken this as a sign that they were lying and they're embarrassed to admit it. It could also be a sign that they're telling the truth and are embarrassed to admit it. I was reading this article on the Nottingham Hidden History blog by Frank E. Earp. He ends the article by saying that he put an appeal on a local Facebook group asking for help in tracking down any of the people involved in the Wollaton Park gnome encounter. One person replied saying, "Patrick was one of the lads I knew in Radford. He was a few years younger than me. I worked with him in the mid-80s. I remember the story about the gnomes, so I asked him about it. He told me it was all Angela's, a friend of his, idea, and that they made it all up." Now, I've no idea if this person was telling the truth about Patrick's confession. And even if what he says is correct, how do we know that Patrick wasn't lying about making up the story? A story like that would bring a lot of ridicule on an adult, and perhaps as he grew older he just found it easier to say that the story was fake. However, it isn't just those children that have seen strange things in Wollaton Park. There have been many more sightings, dating back decades before the 1979 encounter. Going back to the Frank Earp article, in it he tells a story that a friend told him. His friend said, "My Aunt Alma was a very respectable lady who lived in a large house on the embankment. She was a very rational person who would politely laugh at any suggestion of the supernatural. However, she once recalled to us at a family gathering a memory about a trip she made to Wollaton Park as a child in the 1930s with a friend. They were enjoying a picnic by the lake when they noticed, in her words, little people no taller than a doll that cautiously appeared from out of the bushes. They were all dressed in fancy clothes. She claims to have watched them go across the lake on a tiny boat and disappear into the bushes on the other side. To be honest, we joked about it after she left, but it always struck me that she had no need to lie or make up such a story, as it was totally out of character for her." The article goes on to say how 20 years after his Aunt Alma told the story, some friends were visiting from Wales and they went for a day trip to Wollaton Park. When they got back, they said they'd seen some strange little people wearing fancy clothes. These little people were seen down by the lake and they vanished into the bushes when they noticed that they'd been spotted. The earliest encounter I can find comes from the book Seeing Fairies by Marjorie T. Johnson. She writes, "Another account confirming the existence of these gnomes was given to me many years ago by Mrs. C. George of Stapleford, Nottingham. As long ago as the year 1900, she was passing Wollaton Park gates when she saw some little men dressed like policemen standing just inside the lodge entrance. They were smiling and looking very happy," she said. "They hadn't any wings and, as far as I can remember, they were between 2 and 3 feet in height." She also recalled that fairies had been seen dancing around the lake in the park. And there are many more encounters, but I won't go through all of them in this video. I will put a link to the fairy census of 2014 to 2017. If you search Wollaton Park, you'll find a few interesting reports in there. There are more reports in the Wollaton Gnome book that are worth reading as well. So whether you believe in gnomes or not, it does seem that people have seen something weird in the park involving little people. I don't know whether that means that there's a gang of gnomes driving around in bubble cars in the swamps, but it's an interesting story nonetheless, and it's a legend that's existed in the park for well over 100 years. Hopefully one day one of the original children comes forward to give their side of the story, and I know it's a long shot, but if any of them are listening to this, I'd love to hear from you whether the story is true or not. So let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you very much for watching. As always, a massive thank you to everyone who's supporting the channel. If you like strange stories about children encountering unusual creatures, you'll probably enjoy my Sandown Clown video. I also have a playlist of creepy folklore stories if that takes your fancy. If you're watching on YouTube, then they should be on screen now if I've remembered to do my end cards properly. So until next time, goodbye.
Ho, ho, ho!